So I want to talk a bit more about care ethics because at first glance it might look a lot like utilitarianism. Care ethicists, they care about keeping a community connected with each other, and that is very important. And they care about feelings and emotions, and that factors into their moral thinking. But utilitarians are similar in a way. I mean, wouldn't the solution that keeps a whole community connected with each other be the solution where happiness is maximized? And so that would be the right thing to do. And don't utilitarians compromise, which is characteristic of a care ethicist approach? They make compromises to maximize happiness in the world. So I want to turn to the research of one of my professors when I was in grad school, Rita Manning at San Jose State, because she addressed this issue. Is care ethics just another version of utilitarianism, or is it a unique way of thinking, morally? So what she did was year after year, when she taught her ethics classes, she gave her students a scenario and just accumulated all of their answers to it. And it's from an Aesop's Fable. So here's what I want you to think about. A group of moles has spent the summer industriously digging a comfortable burrow. When winter's first icy blasts come, a porcupine begs to be admitted into their burrow for the winter. If the moles admit the porcupine, they'll be less comfortable. The burrow will be overcrowded, and the porcupine's sharp quills will often jab them. So the moral question is, should the moles, who worked really hard throughout the year to build their burrow, admit a porcupine? And there's several different scenarios to consider. The first being that the porcupine is homeless because the porcupine was lazy all year and didn't build a burrow of his own. So in that case, should the moles admit the porcupine in, even as they'll be jabbed with that porcupine's quills throughout the winter? So I want you to think about that and think about what you think the moles ought to do. Should they allow the porcupine in, the porcupine who was lazy and didn't build a burrow of his own? So I'm going to give you a moment just to think about that. Okay. The next scenario is that the porcupine is homeless because he did build a burrow, but it was destroyed. And it was destroyed through no fault of his own. So in this case, the porcupine is sort of a victim of this. And he's asking the moles to admit him into their burrow. Should they do it in that case? Now, the third case I want you to consider is the porcupine is homeless. He didn't build a burrow. It was because he was lazy. But if the moles don't allow him into the burrow, he will die. Should the moles, in that sense, in that case, allow the porcupine in? Okay, I want to look at these scenarios. Rita Manning, who asked this question of student after student, collected a range of responses. One is to reward virtue and punish vice. Okay, so this would be sort of a virtue ethicist approach to the matter. And so in the first case, where the porcupine was lazy, a vice, and didn't build his own burrow, then you would want to punish him for that and make him withstand the winter outside. And you might do the same even knowing that he's going to die. But in the second scenario, where the porcupine did build a burrow, but it was destroyed through no fault of his own, in that sense, he was a hard worker and he ought to be rewarded for it, so he should be admitted in. Okay, so that's one way that people address the issue. Another is by talking about principles. And we've talked about that in this class, referring to a basic moral principle. So, for instance, some people go with the utilitarian principle. Yes, they ought to let him in because he'll cause some kind of small degree of discomfort to the moles, but he won't endure a great degree of discomfort out in the cold. That especially in the last scenario where he would certainly die if he wasn't allowed in. It seems like the utilitarian would say to let him in. Perhaps in the first scenario where it's not clear that he's going to die, the utilitarian might actually say to keep him out because it would cause the many moles to not be have discomfort, and it would just cause suffering to the one. But the point here is that many people refer to a moral principle as their reason for letting the porcupine in or not. Okay, some people go with a reciprocity approach, meaning that they'll help. Don't let the porcupine in if the porcupine has nothing to offer you. But on the other hand, let the porcupine in only on the condition that the porcupine works the entire next year to build a burrow for you. So it's an exchange. That's another way of going about it. And then 4 is self-interest. In this case, if it's not in the interests of the moles, they should not allow the porcupine in. Now, in the first case, they don't want to be poked all winter. They probably keep them out. In the second case, again, they don't want to be poked all winter. Keep them out. It doesn't matter that he built a burrow that got destroyed. In the last case, I don't know. Maybe they would feel so much guilt if they knew that not letting him in was going to cause his death that it's actually in their best interest to let him in. The key point is, whatever conclusion you had, if your reasoning was self-interest, it falls into this category. Now, she detected a fifth one, which is a fifth approach to the issue, which is the care approach. It's not utilitarian because it doesn't refer to some kind of basic moral principle or rule that justifies letting him in or keeping him out. The care approach constructs a compromise with the intention of keeping the community connected. So you don't want to cause resentment among a part of the community. You also don't want to leave a member of that community out in the cold to suffer. So the care approach has an example of it would be to have the porcupine come in and enlarge the burrow with the help of the moles, so they all work together and to create a space where they can all coexist. Now, a utilitarian might come to the same conclusion. That is the solution that minimizes suffering in the world and maximizes pleasure. But the reasoning is different. That's not the solution because we have to always maximize happiness in the world. For the care ethicist, that is the solution that respects everyone in the community, wants to keep everyone connected, and wants to just make the community happy and thriving. But it's not a hard and fast rule like one ought to always maximize pleasure. Okay, so she thought that this example and the different responses people would give helps to indicate what a care approach involves and how it differs from a justice approach. So it's not based on a rule. Okay, that's an important feature of it. It involves compromise, out of the box thinking. Okay, and it is driven by care. By care for community. Okay, just as the nurse or the person who gives care to a child, they're not driven by hard and fast rules. They're always thinking outside the box, and they're trying to help find solutions that keep people comfortable, thriving, and happy.